I wanted to talk about one of the projects that I feel really caught my eye when I was looking at your work, and that's archaeology of the 20th century. Can you tell me a
Yes.
little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, it was an accumulative experience. At the beginning, when I began to do sculptures, right away I began to build things. At one point that I want to make clear, one of the tools that I learned from my father's workshop was the welding machine. The welding machine allows you to put two pieces of metal together and make it one. So the two objects that were separated, when you weld it together, they become one object. So that's kind of maybe the essential of sculpting, of making sculptures based on the concept of collage. What I was right into the creation of collages by putting a lot of metal together that my father was allowing me to use, his scrap metal or whatever was left over from my father's workshop. I used to take it and create things. So as you can see, or you might imagine, I was always looking at the objects that they came to my hands to create my artwork. And it was a sentiment, or it was an emotional thing when I always look at the objects and I was asking myself in silence, only in my mind, wow, look at these objects, where it come from. I'm always wondering the relationship. I always question in everything that I see, the relationship between the objects and who have it before. What was the function of that object? And maybe for how many people went through this object before it came to my hands. So I was, in some way, somehow, I was asking questions more like an archaeologist or an anthropologist without conscience of being one, a professional like that. So eventually, those questions that I was always asking myself in silence, it manifests in a sculpture. It manifests in my aesthetics. So little by little, throughout the years of making art, that questioning in silence within myself actually began to flourish more on the surface. And rather than mixing all those objects together to create a collage or some fantasy, aesthetics or whatever, I began to appreciate more the object itself. And little by little, I began to put the objects on my artwork as a point of entrance so people can appreciate and also influence the viewer to ask the same questions. So Archaeology of the 20th Century was a name put by the director of a gallery that I am represented. That title, that it was the title of a show, the title of my catalog, and so on. I think it marked the shift of my artwork, the aesthetic of my artwork since the last maybe 10 years until today. At the beginning, I was doing more like collage, abstract, figurative, or neo-figurative. And then finally, I began to reveal more myself as an archaeologist of the future, showing in the present what the objects might look like in the future.
I see. So we talked about sculpture as construction, but this is also transformation then, right?
Absolutely, yes.